We will begin the webinar in about 5 minutes. Okay, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Marcus Holmes. I am the sales engineer here at Zycel. I've been with Zycel for over 15 years, and I wanted to welcome you to today's Tech Talk. It's going to be the USG FLEX H, Mastering the Firewall Security Best Practices for Optimal Protection. So let's start with a little bit of housekeeping. So if you have any questions, please go ahead and put them in the question area, and then I will address the questions at the very end of the webinar. So we'll have a Q&A session where I will go over all of the questions that have been raised throughout the webinar for today. So with that, let's go ahead and go over the agenda for today's Tech Talk. So you should be able to see my screen, and we will get started here. So let's go over our agenda. So for we'll talk about some of the new features in Flex for Nebula as it pertains to the things that we'll be talking about with the best practices. So we're going to go over management. We're going to go over updating your firewall, auditing. We'll cover security, and then we'll cover some special configuration cases. So with that, that's going to be our agenda for today. So let's go ahead and start by hopping over to our live GUI. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and stop my share for just a moment, and we're going to switch over to a new share screen. Give me just 1 second here. And we're going to log right into our Nebula dashboard. So here we go. So now you should be able to see my Nebula dashboard. So here we have our firewall, our Flex H, that is in Nebula. Now, we've recently had an update to Nebula. We are on Nebula 19.0. And with that update, we've added a lot of features back into the Flex H that allows you to manage it directly from Nebula. That being said, there still are some features that are missing. So if we go over to our firewall really quick, you'll see that we put back the security policy. So now you can actually set up your security policy. And then we have our firewall settings as well. Now, one of the things you will find that is missing from the cloud side is setting up your signature updates. There's no menu for that particularly here. And then also, you don't have objects for creating user admins. So anytime you need to create a user object, you'll see that the object option does open up. However, you can only do address and service objects. So as it pertains to our management of the devices, anytime that you need to create a specific admin or user admin, and you need to go through, you can't do it in Nebula. You have to go through the local GUI, or you can create the tunnel from Nebula to open up a GUI directly from Nebula itself. And to do that, again, you would just go over to your dashboard, and then you will find your firewall as an icon. Clicking on that icon will take you directly to the firewall devices menu, and scrolling all the way down, you'll see an option for remote configurator. This will establish a secure connection to get directly into your firewall directly from Nebula. This is a better option for security purposes because this way you don't have to set up a specific port forward or opening up ports on the firewall, as it creates a secure connection directly from Nebula. So that's one of the best practices that we want to start with today, is making sure that your firewall is locked down. So right here, I'm actually logged into my local firewall right now. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that everything is locked down on the firewall. We want to make sure that no ports are open. So by default, there are some ports that are open. So let's talk about those ports really quick. So if we go under Object, and then if we look at our service objects, there is a default service group in the firewall that allows specific things to go through. So if I click on the service group, we're going to find a specific group called the default WAN to Firewall. So the default WAN to Firewall group is what allows specific ports to go through by default. And if we go through and edit that, we will see what ports are available. So here we have our groups, and then we have our members. So you'll see that we have our members here. These are the ones that are in that default group. And these are objects that you can choose from. So by default, you're going to see these particular protocols that are enabled by default. RUP is something that I actually added, so I'm going to actually remove that because I no longer use that anymore. But by default, these are the ones that you'd end up seeing. Let me go back to that screen. Apologize. Here we go. All right. So here, these are going to be your default ports that you normally see. These here are going to be specifically for your VPN. So if you're using an IPsec VPN, you have your AH, your ESP, your IKE, and your NAT traversal. These are going to be enabled by default. If you enable SSL VPN, it's going to automatically create an object for you. So if you plan on managing your devices through a VPN, if you manage your firewall through a VPN, or you have a customer that no longer wants to use cloud for whatever reason, maybe there's some security concerns that they may have. There's some customers that actually don't understand cloud that very much, and they have some hesitancy of having their firewall in the cloud. That's absolutely perfectly normal. What you can do is then set up a VPN connection to your firewall to then manage it remotely. Because what we don't want to do is we do not want to leave ports open like 443, or even if you're doing like 8080 of a translation from 8080 to 443, we don't want those ports open. So less ports open you have, the better. So it's better to stick with the default ports and then just VPN in if the customer does not want to use Nebula for remote management. However, if you do want to use Nebula for remote management, you can absolutely do that. There's no additional ports that need to be open. It's going to communicate in the back end with the firewall, okay? So first thing you always want to do is make sure your ports are secure, because you don't want anything open. The next thing you're going to want to do is we're going to want to make sure that all of our signatures are up to date. So if we come down to our licensing status here, we can see signature update on our firewall. So clicking on the signature update, we can see our app patrol, our IPS reputation, our IP reputation, and our IPS. So just like we've done in the past with our USG FLEX and our ATP, the first thing you're going to want to do is make sure that you have a schedule set up. So here we have our schedule for app patrol to automatically update whenever it finds a new update available. So you can do it weekly or daily. So on this firewall, I have it set to weekly, but for best practices, I would suggest that you set it to check every day. Have it check at a specific time that is outside of business hours. So for here, I'm having it check, 1 o'clock in the morning, which is perfectly fine. And you want to go ahead and do that for all of your other services. So same thing, you want to come down here to your schedule for IP reputation, set that to daily, so on and so forth. Now, this will not have any effect specifically on the firewall. It does not reboot the firewall. It just automatically downloads the signature update and applies it. So we can see what the last sync was, and we can see what the last release date for those signatures were. So here we have a signature that just came out a couple of days ago for the IP reputation, and then it last synced on this date. So because I had the app patrol set to weekly updates, it's going to check again on the 20th, but I just changed it to a daily update. That's going to be one of the first things that you do when you're logged into the device, is make sure that you have a signature update schedule to make sure that you are on the latest signature updates, okay? The next thing you're going to do is you want to come down to your upgrades for the firewall. So we want to go to maintenance, and then under maintenance, we want to go to firmware. So for firmware, again, what we want to do is a couple of things here. So if we go to firmware management, we have a new version that has just come out a couple of days ago. But what we want to do is we want to do two things. One, we have a choice of doing auto update, okay? So if I click this option for auto update, what that means is it's going to automatically check. So it automatically checks in the back end every so often to see when there's a new release. If I set it to auto update, that means that when it finds a new release is available, it will then trigger an auto update at the time I specify. So if I set it to every day, that means that after it checks for the latest firmware, on that date, if it finds one, it will then trigger a scheduled firmware update based on the hour I choose. So again, off hours are the best option for this. You can do it weekly. So if it finds something on a Monday, then you can say, well, I wanted to then apply that firmware update on Sunday, the following Sunday, okay? So just be aware that if you select auto update, it's going to follow whatever schedule it is here for the firmware. It's going to check automatically for the latest version regardless, and it's going to continue to constantly check for the latest firmware version, but it will not update for you unless you click the auto update. This is done for a couple of reasons. If you are a network admin and you want to be on site to manually upgrade the firmware, then that's when you turn the auto update version off. All you would have to do is come over to here where it says check now. You can check for the latest release date, and of course it's already found it. And then at that point, you click on the cloud option to download the firmware. And it will download the firmware directly from the cloud itself. Okay? So that's how you keep your firmware up to date on your firewall. So you want to make sure first that your management, you have a way to manage the firewall safely and securely. making sure that all your ports are disabled, that you don't use. You want to keep your ports to a minimum that are open. And then if you're going to be using a VPN to manage your firewall, then you can VPN into the firewall to manage it. Again, we do not want to open up ports to log into the firewall. Once you have your management mode set up, then you set up your updates. You always start with your security policies and, sorry, not your security policies, with your license. Make sure all your licenses are up to date, and then you want to make sure that your firmware is up to date. So moving on, now let's talk about auditing. So what I mean by auditing is we want to make sure that we have our logs set up. So there's two ways we can collect the logs. If we are on Nebula, Nebula has two different versions of licensing. If you have the base version of the licensing, your logs are going to be limited down to one day, 24 hours. So if I come over to monitor, I can go over to my firewall, and I can go to my event log. So if you are on the base pack, you're only going to get 24 hours of logging in Nebula. This is only the Nebula side. If you upgrade to the Plus or Pro pack in Nebula, you get more log retention. So that means if you need more log retention in Nebula for greater than 24 hours, then I would look into getting the Plus or Pro pack. The Pro pack is going to give you the longest log retention in Nebula at 1 year. However, that's not to say that you don't have to use another method. So here, if we go down to our firewall, and if we go to log and report, and we go to the login events, you'll find that it holds as much as the device can hold on its memory. So we have all of these logs that are here, and they are saved, but they will get overwritten. And this goes down all the way out to the bottom. So I believe we're looking at over, 2048. So the firewall, this particular firewall, it is the 200H, can hold up to 2048 log entries, but then they start getting overwritten. With that being said, there's an option that you can do. So if we go over to our log settings, we have a couple of options. What we can do is we can store the log to the USB, meaning that we can put a USB drive directly on the firewall, and then we can then have our logs stored there specifically. Now, if you don't like that option, we can then do a remote syslog server. So if you have a PC or some type of server that has a syslog server software on there, you can actually set it up to send all of your logs to a syslog server for storage. So if you choose not to use the Nebula to store your logs or to go through your logs, the best option would then be to set up a syslog server or to use SecuReporter. And SecuReporter is our own version of a syslog server that kind of breaks things down categorically, and I've done a webinar on that. So if you want more information on that, I would definitely check out that webinar on how to get that set up and some of the advantages and a little bit of the disadvantages of using the SecuReporter for the syslog, because while it does make it a lot easier, it categorizes things based off of top 10 and top 20, and it doesn't give you the 100% full view of what's going on, but rather just gives you a generalized report of what's going on, okay? But if you want your full logs, what I would suggest to do is either store it to a USB storage or use a remote syslog server. And those are gonna be your options for auditing. So that's how you keep your logs for any type of instance of where you need to go back to investigate something. So I can give you an example. We had a customer that called in and said that there was a customer on his network that was sucking down too much bandwidth, and they needed to find out who that person was and what they were doing. So they were able to go through the logs. They were able to find out, first of all, who the bandwidth user was. And then through the logs, they were looking at what sites they were going to and found out that the person was actually torrenting files. So at that point, they ended up putting up some security measures to prevent that from happening even further. So it's always good to try to keep your logs as long as you can, just because if there's a situation that arises, you may need to go back a couple of days or a couple of weeks to find that particular user if they've already gone. So if it was hospitality, They may have been there and they may have left, but this gives you the ability to go back pretty far to try to investigate what happened and to prevent, put preventative measures in to keep that from happening another time. Okay, so that's going to be our auditing for our firewalls. The next thing we want to talk about is security in itself. So what I mean by security is going to be what can we do from a security standpoint for our firewall. So the first thing we want to talk about is our admin users. So in the firewall and the GUI, if we go to object, if we go to user authentication and go to user/group, this is going to be where your admins are located. Now, I want to make this clear here that when it comes to creating an admin, you cannot create an admin in Nebula. There's no option to create or change admin parameters for the GUI or for the firewall in Nebula. You just don't have that ability as of right now. So that means that if you have to change a password or if you need to make it a change to a password, you have to log into the GUI to do it. So as far as best practices goes for your admin users or any user to begin with, what you want to do is come over to this user section and then go over to the settings, because the settings have some interesting things that I would suggest to configure. So one of the things you have here is going to be your lease time. This is going to be the amount of time a user has until they have to re-authenticate. So by default, on the firewalls, it's set to 1 day. So that means that an admin user who is logged in doesn't have to re-authenticate for at least another day. What I would suggest to do is, this is going to be tailored to based on your needs, but I would make this lease time a lot shorter. That means that they have to re-authenticate every so often. So if you put it to 30 minutes on the lease time, we put it to, or an hour, that means that they would have to re-authenticate. If they're logged in, they'll get kicked out and they'll have to re-log in again. So that's going to be up to you, but I would suggest to keep it less than 1 day. 1 day for lease time is a little bit too much, in my opinion. I think that, leaving it to a shorter time is probably going to be best, specifically for those users who are just going to be in and out making configuration changes for those admins. The second thing we want to try to look at is what's going to be our admin type security. And what we can do here is we can force a password change for the admin user on a specific time period. So a lot of people feel that 6 months is good. Anywhere in the range of 3 to 6 months is probably going to be best. So 90 to 180 days to force change a password. That means that the moment you boot up the device for the first time, you log in, it's going to ask you to change the password. The default password is 1234, but after you've logged in for the first time to set up the firewall, it will then ask you to create a new password. At that point, that's when the timer starts. So if it was the 1st of January, that means you have 90 days or 180 days, depending on how you have it set up, to get forced to change the password. I would highly suggest that you set this up to have a forced change, because even though you may have a lot of passwords to remember from many other devices, you want to have your password change. You don't want to keep the same password just for security purposes. You want to have it change out. Now, when it comes to the password itself, we can actually choose a complexity for our admins. So, and also our users as well. But for our admins, if we click on it, we have an option for our complexity. So if we enable it, we can change the minimum password length. We can have a force of at least 1 uppercase for the letter, 1 digit, and 1 special character. So these are something that I would highly suggest. Setting your minimum password length to at least a minimum, some say 8, anywhere from 8 to 16 as a minimum length, having 1 uppercase, 1 digit, and 1 special character. And this will force this. So that basically means that if you try to enter in a password and it doesn't meet that complexity, it will then go through and tell you that you've missed the complexity for that setup. Next, under here, we have user logon settings. So what this means is we can set up the maximum number of users that can be logged in simultaneously. So if you enable this, by default, that means only 1 admin can log in. If you have multiple users, what I would highly suggest you do is give those particular users their own account and set them up as an admin. You don't want to share the admin account and have multiple people logging in, because when it comes to running an audit, if somebody made a change and you want to find out who made that change, well, if everybody's sharing the same admin account, you don't know who that was. However, if each individual person has their own admin account and they're limited to one simultaneous login, that tightens the restrictions down, and it prevents anything from happening to where you cannot discern who that admin was. So I would highly suggest enabling the limit simultaneous admin logins, and then also you can limit the simultaneous access logins as well. Now, down here at the bottom, the limit logon retry. Now, this is also enabled by default, and what this means is that when someone enters in a username and password to log on to the firewall, there is a maximum retry count. And by default, it's set to 5. So after they have tried to enter a username and password and it is incorrect 5 times, that device or that IP address is locked out from being able to access the GUI, or more so be able to log in. So that means that there's a 30-minute cool off after entering in the password wrong 5 times. Now, if you would like to, you could increase this. It just depends on how you feel about the lockout period. 30 minutes usually tends to be good. That means that if for some reason somebody was local to the network and you had set it up so that there's no security policies based on IP address to reach the login screen, and someone's trying to go through and access the GUI and they're just trying random passwords, after about 5 times, they will no longer be allowed to try to enter in any more passwords for 30 minutes. So here is a good option to set that lockout period. You can set it to an hour, or you can set it to 2 hours, you can set it to a full day. It depends. The maximum minutes, of course, is being 65,535, which is quite a long time. So you can set that up. That's something that we highly suggest that you do. Now, another thing that we can do as well is limiting the access to the GUI itself. So to limit access to the GUI, what we can do is set up a policy. So on that policy control, what we can do is add a rule that specifies that only specific IP address ranges have access to the local GUI. And in order to do that, we can just set up a specific firewall rule. So we could say anything coming from, our LAN interface. I'm sorry, wrong one here. Let's go wrong back this one. Let's do LAN, let me back out of this really quick, sorry. Keep it as it is, let's cancel. We'll go ahead and add, so we'll leave this as is from any, so let's start off from the LAN zone. And then we'll do from LAN to Firewall. So from LAN to Firewall, so that means anything coming from our LAN zone to our Firewall. And then the source, what we can do is a specific source. So we say the source is any and destination, any, and we say port 443, or we put the source is any, the destination as the LAN IP address. So we put in, say, 192.168. I'm not going to create an address object for it, but if we create an address object for it, it will be 192.168. For this particular one, it is 100.1. So we will put in, create an address object as the destination as the LAN IP for the GUI, 192.168.100.1. We would put that in as a destination, and then we would go down to our action, and then we would just basically deny it. And that would prevent anybody from having local GUI access. But then above that, what we can do before making that rule is create an exception rule that allows a specific IP address. So if you have your DHCP set up with a DHCP reservation, which I'll show you how to do in just a moment, what you can do from there is set up so that your computer gets the same IP address every time. So that means that when you come on site, you get the same IP address regardless based on your MAC address. And you can put that particular IP address as an exception to the rule, which is above the deny. So you would set up the first rule as allowing that specific computer to have access to the local GUI. And then underneath that would be your deny rule that prevents people from accessing it on port 443. So remember, if you do set that up, make sure it's on port 443. Otherwise, it's just basically, if you set it to any, it's just going to block anything going to the gateway. So we want to just do it to 443. Now, I had mentioned a minute ago about DHCP reservations. So DHCP reservations are a nice tool to use, specifically when you are using or you're setting up a network with multiple devices. So what you can do is come over to your interface and you would come down to one of your LAN interfaces. So for instance, if I go here to my LAN, I have a VLAN set up. If I come over to here and hit edit, what I can do is set up a DHCP reservation list. So if I scroll all the way down to our DHCP, I can set up a static DHCP table. So here on the static DHCP table, I can then select an option that has a device. So basically, if we have the host name, we have an IP address, all we would have to do is click on it and then click the option reserved. And then that will make sure that that device continues to get the same IP address. Now, this is a very good option to use, specifically if you're doing a very large install where you have TVs, phones, and other devices that you are controlling. You want to make sure that those devices get the same IP address, because when it comes down to auditing, if you have to look through the logs, if you look at the IP address, you know what that IP address is assigned to. So I highly suggest for best practices that anytime that you are going to have devices for your customers that they're going to use, printers, TVs, tablets, what have you, try your best to always put them in a DHCP reservation list. Let the clients have their own IP. Let them get it normally. Don't make them static. Let them, if it is like hospitality where they're coming and going, let them get an IP address automatically. But if it's devices that you're controlling or devices that you are configuring, even if it's a computer or a desktop for a specific user, put them in the DHCP reservation list, because it will make auditing a lot more easier to determine who that particular IP address belongs to. Okay. Now, let's talk about special cases. And what I mean by special cases, we'll talk about a specific, we'll call them specific cases where customers need a little bit more configuration. So let's start with bandwidth management. So when it comes to bandwidth management, this tends to be a popular conversation because a lot of things that are used on the network suck up a lot of bandwidth. If you are allowing customers to stream media like Netflix, Hulu, stuff like that, the problem with those services is if the customer happens to have a Netflix account that has the 4K, the 4K streaming quality, that means that when they connect to the network, they will try to download to the highest quality, which is going to be 25 megabits per second. So that user comes in, they open up their phone, their tablet, they connect to Netflix, and then it looks at the amount of bandwidth on the network, and then it says, okay, well, I'm going to take 25 megabits per second. We don't want to do that for specific cases. So what we can do in our bandwidth management is set up a bandwidth management rule. So if you happen to have the application control, this is where this comes into play. So what we'll do is just do a real quick test real quick. So let's put in a test, or we'll just call it Netflix for right now. So that's going to be the name of this particular bandwidth management policy. So for our incoming interface, we're going to choose the LAN port. So I have multiple different LANs because I have VLAN set up. So let's just say that for our kids that we have here. So we have the kids on their own LAN, their own VLAN, and I'm going to select that as the source. And the outgoing interface, I only have one WAN port, so I'm going to choose GE1. So here's our incoming interface. Now for our source, again, we're going to use the kids. I already have a specific address group or address object created for that particular subnet. Destination, of course, is going to be any. Now, instead of service object, what I can choose is application group. So if I click on application group, I can come down to our dropdown, and we have all of these different application groups. So here, I'm going to go ahead and select Netflix because that's the particular thing that I want to block. Now there's other things that we can do as well. I can do, Hulu, and let's say Apple Music, but for right now, we'll just keep Hulu and Netflix for the application group. And if there's something that you need to find, you can also search for something here. So if I type in, let's say, if you're doing torrenting, you can do BitTorrent. Yeah, there you go. So you type in BitTorrent, you can also do that as well. But that allows you to block specific things on the firewall, but we're more concerned about bandwidth management. So here we have our application group, Netflix and Hulu. Now for the user, we'll leave that as any, and then come down here, we can then specify the download limit. So here I can limit those applications because it's going to be using the App Patrol service license to look at the layer 7 of the application layer packet and see that it is Netflix or Hulu that's going across the network. We can then apply a download limit and an upload limit. So here we can limit it down to 1 megabit per second. So that means that anybody using Netflix or Hulu won't be able to utilize all of your network bandwidth. And that's something that you definitely don't want your users to be able to do. So this is a specific use case where you want to prevent users from sucking up too much bandwidth based on a specific application. Now, on the converse side, let's just say that you wanted to be able to provide a specific amount of bandwidth for prioritization. So here, let's take a look at SIP traffic. So if I go to Service Object now, and I click on this option here, I can select the service. I type in SIP. There it comes up right there. So that's the object, and it's already set up. So it's going to be 5060 for SIP, already there. Now what we can do is set it up to unlimited. However, now we can give it the highest priority. So we have real time and highest. So real time is going to give it the highest priority that we can set. Sorry, highest priority is going to be 1. Real time is going to be decided on at the moment. So put it as highest for number 1. And this is going to give you a SIP traffic, unlimited bandwidth, and it's going to have the highest amount of priority. And we can also set it to log. So if we set it to log, it'll just log it in the logs, and you'll be able to see when that rule is enacted. So anytime somebody uses SIP traffic to make a call, or anybody tries to make a call and produces SIP traffic, it will show up on the logs, and we can have it log it. If we set it to log an alert, well, then the logs will show up as red because there's a policy that you can set up to have it email you. Anytime you have it set up to log an alert, it will send an email out to you. So this is a special case for that's a special case for SIP. Now, earlier I had talked about BitTorrent. So for BitTorrent, what we can do is a little bit different. I'm going to go ahead and cancel this rule out here. So for BitTorrent, let's just say that we wanted to prevent a user from using BitTorrent. So what we would do first is go over to our security services and go to Application Patrol. Because Application Patrol is our licensed service that allows you to scan specific applications that are coming through your network. And the reason being is because while content filtering does cover your web traffic for specific websites based on category, Application Patrol will go a little bit further and look at applications because Facebook website is different from the Facebook app. The Facebook app will use randomized ports, so there's no way for us to determine what that app is doing using content filtering. Content filtering looks at whatever website you're going to, and then it flags it based on its category. So for App Patrol, I already have a profile set up, but let's go ahead and take a look at it really quick. So I have a profile called BitTorrent. So under BitTorrent, I have multiple peer-to-peer applications set up. So what we have here is under this application, I have 6. So these are all the BitTorrent applications that can be found under peer-to-peer category. So just selecting what BitTorrent itself is not going to be enough. What you really want to do is go through each and every one of these different services, and you want to block them, because we've had a customer that one time only blocked one thing, this BitTorrent, and it's on its own, but it looked like somebody was using something like eDonkey and it didn't flag it. So you want to go through and look at every single one of these and block them. So, these are all the popular BitTorrent services. The reason why I would definitely go through this list and not select everything, but just only select the things that you want to block, is there are some things that are caught up under this. So the Windows Update Delivery Optimization, that's actually categorized as a peer-to-peer. So again, definitely want to go through this, check it out, make sure you are only blocking the things that you want to block, okay? So after you've created your policy, it's going to look for this, right? And that's going to give an action. We want to drop it. And we can also log it as well, so we can see in our logs to make sure that everything is working as it should. So we want to make sure that the packet is dropped. After you've created this particular rule for BitTorrent, that's when you want to go up to your security policy and enable it in your security policy. So under security policy, policy control, what we can then do is create a new firewall rule. So we can give this a name. We're going to call this just BitTorrent. And then what we're going to do is we're going to select from any to any. We're just going to leave it as default. Our source, we want to choose our subnet. So if we're doing this on the kids network or the main network or whatever it might be, or we can just do any. So as a source, and destination is any. So that basically means it's coming from anywhere. And what we want to do here is drop down to application profile or application control. Do not change this here at all. Action allow, leave this as it is, because what this is doing is it is allowing the traffic through the firewall. However, we want to enact the profile that already has the deny in it. So then we select BitTorrent as the application control for that profile. So that basically means that any traffic that's coming from anywhere, we're going to allow it, but before we let it out to the internet, we're going to check against the application control profile. And the application control profile will block and drop based on what we have set in the profile. Okay? So that's our basic special cases when it comes to best practices. And then the last thing I want to talk about for special cases is going to be for your VLANs. So on the VLAN side of things, what you can do is you can set up multiple VLANs. And what I would do is you can set them up in Nebula. So of course, we do have the option to set up VLANs in Nebula. However, what you'll find is when you go to your port and interface in Nebula and you start going through and setting up all of your VLANs, there is a limitation based on space in the cloud as to how many VLANs you can create. If you are hitting that limit, you can always log back into the GUI to set that up, because they will cross sync. While you won't have the ability to manipulate past that limit in Nebula, you will still be able to configure it on the GUI side, on the local GUI side, and Nebula will still process it. You just won't be able to manipulate the data, like change, let's say you created 50 VLANs, it's only going to show you 48, I believe, in the cloud right now. And then that means that your 49th and 50th VLANs, they will still exist, but you won't be able to see them just because of storage limitations. So just be aware that these devices do sync back and forth if you have it in Nebula. So if I make a change over here, it will sync back. So just keep that in mind, that these two do sync when they're in Nebula. So if you make a change, vice versa, they'll go back and forth. So just keep that in mind. So for creating a VLAN, that's something that we normally do suggest as a best practice, especially if you're using a switch and you're using access points. It allows you to divide up the network into different network segments. So in my example here, we have multiple different, at my house, we have all the adults have their own VLAN, the kids have their own VLAN, and then all of our media devices are on their own VLAN as well. So that's just done for separation purposes. And we suggest that you try to do the same whenever possible so that you can separate your traffic. That means that if you have a customer that is starting up a business and they would like to have Wi-Fi and a firewall and a switch, what you can do is you can ask them, hey, how many departments do you have? You have a sales department, you have a marketing department, you have maybe a shipping department, and then you ask them, do you want them to be able to communicate across, communicate with each other? If they do, then fine, you can do a flat network. But if they come to you and say, yes, I want them to be in different segments, or I want the different departments to have different rules based on who they are, what department they belong to. VLANs are going to be helpful in creating that separation. Because with VLANs, what you can do is, for example, you have a marketing department and then you have a sales department, two different departments with two different needs. Your sales department may not need access to social media, but your marketing department will absolutely need social media. If you have VLANs, you can then separate the networks, have them on two different segments of the network, and then you can apply specific security policies. So that means the marketing department can have full access to social media and have access to Facebook, Instagram, so on and so forth, while your employees on the staff and sales network will not have access to social media. So that's why you would want to set up a VLAN. And to do that really quick, all you would have to do is come to your interface section, click on internal, click on add, and then when the section comes up, you just change your interface type, keep it as Ethernet, and then you give it a name, assign it to the port that you want to assign the VLAN to. So if I'm assigning it to P6 on my firewall, I would choose that. And then after that, you choose what zone it belongs to, right? And then under additional settings here, this is where we can set more of additional settings. And I did miss one thing here. Hold on a second. Let me go back a little bit. Here we go. So interface type, drop down from Ethernet, change it to VLAN, and then we want to give the VLAN a name. So keep your names like your ID. So if I change it to VLAN 300, and then our VLAN ID down here is going to be 300. So make sure you drop down from Ethernet down to VLAN, and that creates the VLAN. And as far as the address settings, what we can do is we would just straight go down to our, where to go? Second, here we go. You have use fixed IP address. So address assignment from unassigned to use fixed IP address. And this is where you would type in your IP address for the VLAN. So if I put it as 101.1, and then I can do a slash notation, /24 makes it a full 255.255.255.0 network. And then that's all we would have to do. Down here under DHCP server, we can enable the DHCP server, and this allows us to choose our pool size and then also choose our DNS that's handed out to the VLAN. So we can have it come from the firewall, or we can put in a customized DNS, whether it be from the ISP or from a public DNS server. So that's how you would set up your VLANs. And again, that's going to be based on the customer's needs. We usually suggest that when you can, try to do VLANs because it does open up a lot more options, specifically when you need to do granular configurations, having specific network segments have access to certain things on the internet, so on and so forth. Okay, so that's pretty much the gist of how to set up best practices for the USG FLEX H, very similar to our ATP firewall and our regular Flex firewall. So at this point, what I'm going to go ahead and do is go ahead and open up the floor. For right now, we're going to go ahead and go straight to our Q&A session. So if you have questions, I'm going to go ahead and go through the Q&A section and see if there are any questions that you might have. So far, nothing has been asked. Okay, yes, here we go. Is there a way to specify the actual upload/download speeds of the ISP connection to help with bandwidth management decisions made by the firewall? Yes, actually there is. And so what I will do real quick is I will show you where you can set that up at. So give me just a second and switch back to my other screen. But yes, that actually, there's a two-part section for that, and there's a two-part reason for why you would want to do that. Let me go to my share. A second here. There we go. All right, so one of the things that you are going to see when it comes to setting that up is under your WAN. So if I go and edit my WAN port really quick, you will see that there is a section for, here it is, NTU. It used to be there. Let me check. Let me verify this really quick. TV check. Looks like it's not in the Flex H as of right now. I'll have to go back and double check, but there usually is a section to where you can specify it. I know on the Nebula side you can. So if we go over to the Nebula side and we go to our interfaces over here, and if I edit my interface right here, there is a section for that. So here we can specify they moved that as well. I do apologize. So some things have been changed around. Yeah, it looks like it has been removed. So that's something I'm going to have to ask our engineers about, because there used to be a section to do that. Well, what we can do here, let me actually do this instead. Let's go to our zone, because usually on the zone is going to be where you would set that up. So let's go over to our interface and port status, object, zone. There we go. There's our WAN zone. Give me just a minute here. I do apologize. Okay, here we go. So network interface and trunk. So the trunk is going to be what handles that. So things have been moved around a bit. I do apologize. But what you can do is let's take a look at our default trunk really quick. So we have GE1 and GE2 in our default trunk. Now here, not here either. I do apologize. Yeah, this is going to have to be something that we have to look into, because I know on the older series, on the 8 series, the non-8 series, what you would do is you can go in and actually edit the trunk interface, and it will give you the ability to set the maximum throughput for it, but it looks like it's not available here. So this is something that we'll have to talk with our engineers about to find out where that's going to be set. It might be set more than likely in a CLI command to set what the maximum throughput is, because usually if you come over to Nebula, that was one of the things that we would put is right here. We would specify the actual speed of the WAN port. And the reason why you would want to set the speed of the WAN port is because it uses this information for failover. If you're doing a least load first type of algorithm, it uses that information based off of what the actual throughput speed is. So yeah, that's something I will definitely check into and get back to you. I do apologize for that. Let's see. How do we allow firewall rules between VLANs? So adding a firewall rule between your VLAN is going to be simply done by setting up your security policy. So under your security policy, under policy control, all you would have to do is allow a VLAN to talk to another VLAN. You would simply put the source is that specific VLAN. So let me close out of this part here. If I go to our service source here, I would select a specific VLAN. So I have the kids as a VLAN, that's their interface IP address, or I can just do the whole subnet. So if I choose that specific subnet, I can go ahead and create let's say an address object. I could specify a subnet, and then I can put in that specific subnet for the VLAN. You will put that in as the source, the destination as the other VLAN, and then you will put the next hop as auto. And that's just going to allow it to traverse the VLAN because you're creating a firewall rule to allow it. And then you would do the reverse policy to send the traffic back. So VLAN 100 to VLAN 300, allow, and then set the next hop as the interface. And then you would say, not the next hop, I'm sorry, that's a routing rule. You would set the firewall rule to allow it between those two. So you say source, VLAN 100, destination, VLAN 300, allow, and then reverse that as well. All right. When will remote access VPN and Nebula DNS make it to Nebula for the Flex H series? I believe that's going to be in the next update, because if you will see here in Nebula, that's something that actually got removed temporarily. So under the VPN, if you go to configure and you go to site-to-site VPN, you will see that there is no longer the script option for the VPN. There's a manual link where you can actually set up the VPN settings by hand, but you'll notice that the script has now been removed. If you need the script for the VPN, you'd have to log into your local side and then go into the VPN settings to get your script. So your remote access VPN script is still here. It's just only found in the GUI. And I believe on the next update, it's going to, for Nebula 19.10, they will add that back in for the firewall. Okay. Where do you set up country exclusives? So if you're talking about an address object for country exclusives, that is going to be in the, that's going to be in your objects. So first thing you want to do is create an object, and you should still be able to do that here in Nebula as well. So we'll try to do them both at the same time. So under object, so we're not going to save that. You can add a specific object. So let's look at a address object. So if I click on address object, and let's click on add, we can type in so let's put in China for right now. And then for host, we go on to geography, and then we can choose what part of the country. So if I put in China, we can pick that up. And that's our address object. So we've now created an address object. The same thing can be done on the local GUI. You just go down to object, go to address, and then what you will do is go to GeoIP and make sure that your GeoIP is updated to the latest version. And then what we can do is go to address. Same thing we did in the Nebula side, click on add. And then for the address type, you just put in geography and then choose the region. That creates the rule, that creates the address specific object. And then after that address object has been created, then you would simply apply it to a firewall rule. So if you come back over to configure on Nebula, and then you would go to your security policy, you can then just create a firewall rule to block it. So you just put a name, you would put deny, action deny, and you say from, and then you would have your, let me move over here a second here so I can see this. So we'll put in China. We're not using a application rule here. My screen's a little bit too big for it to, there we go. So you put from, from any to any, or from any to Zywall, and then you will put your source. You just scroll down and we'll find the one that we just created. So we created China, and then that's basically going to prevent them from, it'll prevent or drop the traffic coming from that specific region. Same thing is done on the local GUI as well. It's just, they're designed, the GUI of the Flex H is kind of designed similarly to look very similar in Nebula. So you just follow the same exact settings for that as well. All right, let's see, next question. Let's see, is there any plan to introduce a backup firmware option for the H series devices similar to what we had in the older ACP and Flex units? Talking about the secondary, if you're talking about the secondary firmware bank, that I don't have any information on at the moment. That's something that I will ask our engineers to find out if that will be ever re-implemented. But I don't have that information as of right now, or if there's any plans to re-implement that. All right, let's see. If I have several 48 port switches, would you recommend to connect each one to a certain port on the firewall or daisy chain to something else? That's really going to be dependent on what you are trying to accomplish. Under normal circumstances, depending on the actual throughput needed, our firewalls do support link aggregation. So if you need higher bits of bandwidth, you can do a link aggregation and set up link aggregation going to a core switch. So you would use a much beefier core switch, and you can link ag from that particular core switch to the firewall. And from there, you can then, I wouldn't daisy chain. I would probably do like a hub and spoke, where you have the core switch as the hub, and then you have the rest of the switches as your spoke, and then you can do a link aggregation off that core switch directly to the firewall port. So you can link aggregate the ports from the switch to the firewall. Let's see, is there a DNS service already set up on the H series like the Flex series, i.e. nebula.x.x.x.dns? This actually, no. As of right now, the reason why you would end up seeing, and this particular question I've seen come up a couple of times, well, the reason why you don't see a Nebula Firewall or Nebula DNS setting is because that was pertaining directly to our remote access VPN. So when you create the script in Nebula, it can use that remote access VPN, and it uses that particular host name that's tied to Nebula, which is then tied back to your WAN IP address. So as of right now, there is no direct created Nebula DNS right now for the H series. Eventually, when they add that script back in for downloading for the VPN, we should start to see that created again. But for right now, no. If you need to use a dynamic DNS service, what you would probably need to do is set up your own within the firewall. We do support it. So if you on Nebula itself, if you go over to configure and I believe firewall settings, there is an option for a DDNS, for dynamic DNS service. So you just need to add in what service you're going to be using, and then that will tie back to the firewall itself. So right now, no, there's no Nebula created one for the H series right now. You'd have to provide your own. Is Nebula able to handle SIP and site-to-site VPN? Are you talking about at the same time? Because we can do site-to-site VPN and SIP at the same time. We do have site-to-site Nebula, so if we go over to our site-to-site settings, we can create a Nebula site-to-site. What this means is if you're connecting to another device that's in Nebula, it pretty much can generate that link for you, or you can create it manually like you would in the firewall on the GUI side, adding in all your phase 1 and phase 2 to create the site-to-site VPN. Let's see, there's now a host name field in the static DHCP table. Can you explain how to use the host name portion and how does that differ from the previous firewalls? Okay, so if we go to the static DHCP table, we'll actually take the shortcut. If you want to get to the DHCP table, what you can do is go straight from the dashboard, scroll down to your DHCP lease reservation and DHCP server. What you can just do is go straight to the lease section. I'm sorry, not the lease. We want to go back to the static. So give me a second here. All right, so reservation here. So this will take us back to the reservation list. And let's just click on the kids and edit. Click. I was hoping we'd be able to shortcut our way back there, but it looks like we can't. So we'll just have to go the long way. So go back to interface. And we're going to select, get this out of the way really quick. Oops. Network, interface. And let's pick this one here. Let's scroll down to our static DHCP table. Oh, no, it's going back to the same place. But yeah, I know what you're talking about here. Let me bring that up. Sorry about that. Yeah, I just saw it earlier, and where did it go? My apologies. I am trying to find it. I might need to make my screen a little bit smaller, but that's something I'll have to look into. I don't have a direct answer for that right now, but that was something that was added. I believe the host name field in the static DHCP table. Let me go back to that really quick. I apologize. Here, let's do. Here we go. This one here. Let me scroll down to one that actually has one. Here we go. So if you're talking about this host name field, bring up the question. I don't think there was any difference between the two. The host name is basically what's picked up by the device. However, I do know that if you were to edit, you can put in your own host name. So instead of it being the MAC address, you can actually put in on the host name field, you can put in a specific device name or whatever you choose. This is just basically what it picks up by default. If there is no host name, it tends to be sometimes blank, or it'll pick up a MAC address, but you can put in your own default host name. I've done that on several occasions where I couldn't find what the device was and I figured out what it was, but I was able to edit it and put my own host name value in. Now, that's not going to change the host name on the device. That's just what the firewall is going to report it as. So it's just going to see it as that's the host name. And then if you were to try, I believe if you try to ping it as well, you can ping it by that host name because the firewall will be able to translate that to its IP address. Okay, next up, if I have a branch office connected with IPsec VPN with HQ, can I set up a rule that some sites, which I try to open it from the branch office using a VPN tunnel to avoid geofencing protection so they can easily be opened from the branch office and altogether, or all the traffic goes locally out? Let me think about that for a minute. I need to kind of reread this a few times, but I think I know what you're talking about. And it's a VPN. I think it's a VPN from HQ. Can I set up a rule that some sites that open it from the branch office use a VPN tunnel? Okay, okay. So you want specific websites that you open to go through the VPN tunnel. I don't think there's the ability to do that as of right now because you would need, what you would need for that to happen would be something in the policy route to do that. Because the policy route doesn't have the ability to put in a specific host, I believe. Let's see. Yeah, it's by destination address. It's not by host. If the routing had the ability to put in a host name for a destination address, if you were to put a host in, then you absolutely would be able to do that. But as of right now, because of that, you can't. And the reason why is this. So if you have your VPN tunnel, what you could do is if you set up your sources being that specific LAN address, but the destination was a specific host name on the internet, you could set up your next hop as a VPN tunnel. But because there's no option to put in the destination address as a host name, it's not going to work. I mean, you can arbitrarily try it based on IP address, but IP addresses change unless you know every single IP address for that particular website. You would have to put it in as a group and put that in as the destination address, and then that would allow you to kind of circumvent that. But I mean, really, until there's an option to add in a destination address as a host or an FQDN, I'm sorry, then no, we can't do that. Microchip can do it. Yeah, I'm sure I've heard that they can, but as of right now, our engineers, I think that might be in the pipeline for them to be able to set up something like that. But right now, I think they're really focused on getting the firewall, the H series, into parity with the Nebula, and then we'll start to see more enhancements later on down the road. So I can look into that as a feature request and get back to you. All right. All right. So now that we've ran a little over, if there aren't any more questions, what we can do here, let's see. Oh, I do have one more question. OpenVPN, how many users can use it at the same time in the performance? I don't know the exact number of people that can use it, but when it comes to OpenVPN on the firewall on the H series, there's a whole thing that you have to do to create the script because there's no script that can be created directly from the firewall. But there is a method to where you can create an open VPN connection to connect to the firewall. It requires you to download a specific script, not from the firewall, but for creating one for VPN or open VPN and modifying it. If anybody needs any information on that, I can send them out a walkthrough for that. But as far as how many VPN users, it's going to be based off of what the firewall's VPN user limit is. So if you're using, say, a Flex 200, Flex 200H has a specific limit as to how many IPsec VPN connections you can make. So it will take from that. So that's going to be your maximum VPN connections based off of that particular firewall. So as far as the speed is concerned, I don't know that information because I haven't tested extensively with OpenVPN, but I do know that your amount of users that you can connect is going to be limited to the firewall model that you have. All right, well, with that being said, I believe that's going to be it for today's session. I do appreciate all of you guys for hanging around, asking all the questions. If you do have any other additional questions, what you can do is you can email me directly. My email is marcush, marcush @zicel.com. And you can email me directly with any questions that you have. And with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and close off this webinar. I'll leave it open for just a couple more seconds, but we are done for today. I appreciate you from joining me today, and you guys have a wonderful day. Thank you.